Today we're going to talk about the constitutional underpinnings that are the foundation of our government. Remember that we started with a Revolutionary War, and so the challenge after the Revolutionary War was to form a government that could operate in the absence of the King of England. So there was a Continental Congress which was formed from representatives of the various states in the late 1777 to 1789 period. We always had this representative concept where states would send delegates to the Congress. And the first Congress was governed by something called the Articles of Confederation, which is what we'll talk about today. It was a loose confederation of states because the states were the basic building blocks of the country. But before we get to that, we had to endure a rebellion. The farmers in 1786 were concerned about the poor crops, that their farms were going to be foreclosed by the bankers, and they rebelled, 4,000 of them, and formed groups at the government. The governor appealed to the other governors for help, but there was no national government, so there was no national army. There was no way to put down the rebellion, and Massachusetts had to raise private funds to quell the rebellion. This scared people a great deal, and it's said to have brought George Washington out of retirement, and he thought that the government wasn't functioning as it needed to be. So under these Articles of Confederation, as the rebellion pointed out, this was the revolutionary, post-revolutionary government. There was a Continental Congress. And as the name suggests, it was a weak confederation of states. There was no national government, and the weakness that was pointed out during Shays' Rebellion led to people saying, let's revise these articles and form a stronger government that's more apt to govern during these times. So some of the weaknesses that were pointed out were that there was no taxation. They had to raise special funds and appropriate them to the states. There was no regulation of trade. There was no uniform currency. There were none of the things that we think of today and when we think of the United States of America. Now, the one thing that it did do, it came up with the name United States of America. And so the Articles of Confederation created the country as we know it then, and then as it formed into the Constitution. So the ideas of this Constitutional Convention were still limited government, individual freedoms, representative government, and representative government means that we don't have a direct democracy. People aren't making the decisions for themselves, but they're electing representatives who go to a Congress or a state legislature and enact the laws. So this concept of limited government was a very strong concept. James Madison, who was considered the founder of the Constitution, and wrote many letters to Jefferson and to Washington during this time, pushing this idea of a new constitution, had the phrase that we wanted a government strong enough, but not too strong. Strong enough to govern, but not too strong that it took away individual freedoms and turned the guns on the people. So checks and balances were also very important to Madison. The idea that we had to form checks within the government to keep it from becoming too strong. We'll learn much more about this, but some concepts that you'll understand are that bills have to be passed by two bodies. The president can veto a bill. The Supreme Court can interpret the Constitution. These were all what we call checks and balances that Madison was writing about in his letters to Jefferson and Washington. So we'll look ahead to talking about checks and balances, separation of powers, federalism, and the general principles of the Constitution that shaped the early government.